Great. Take it away, Amy.
Hi, everyone. I think we'll just wait maybe a minute or so while people are joining the call and tuning in. It's such a nice, warm summer night, and I know that some of the coastal areas had issues with power outages and everything. So I hope that everybody who was planning to tune in is able to, but if not, we understand. And I think there might be a recording of the call as well. Is that the case, Azer?
Yes, it certainly is.
Okay, great. That's good. Let's see, I think we can get started now then. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on this important call with Peter Garrett of Maine Citizens Climate Lobby, Sean Mahoney of Maine Conservation Law Foundation, Beth Ahern of Maine Conservation Voters, Jonathan Fulford of the Sierra Club of Maine, and Jeff Clements, the founder of American Promise. With the goal of getting big money out of politics, we at American Promise are leading a cross-partisan effort to pass the 28th Amendment to the US Constitution in order to give a voice back to individuals so that we the people, not big money, corporations, unions, and super PACs, are in charge of our democracy once again. In Maine, we have launched the Stand With Maine campaign in order to bring attention to the 2013 resolution passed by the Maine legislature that supported an amendment to the US Constitution regarding campaign finance and called for members of the Maine congressional delegation to promote such an amendment in Congress. This resolution was passed through the cross-partisan effort of Democrats, Independents, Republicans, all alike in the Maine legislature at the time, including American Promise chapter member Roger Cates, who is also on the call tonight. Thank you, Roger. I should mention, Azer must have plugged my name in here because I'm using the computer of Beth Ahern tonight, in case anyone was wondering why my face and name didn't match. Thank you, Azer. American Promise Maine members have joined the chapter for many reasons, all of which have a common denominator. Issues that are important to them struggle to make headway in Congress no matter how large a majority of Americans support those issues, because big money interests using pay-to-play tactics often win the day. Climate change and conservation are the top concerns of many chapter members as well as Mainers throughout the state. Last month, we heard from David Trahan of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine about how out-of-state money pouring into Maine affects our political process, including referenda concerning our great outdoors. Tonight, we'll hear from Peter, Sean, Beth, and Jonathan about how big money in politics affects climate change and conservation efforts in Maine. Also, I'd like to thank the sponsors of tonight's call, Maine Citizens Climate Lobby and the Sierra Club of Maine. Jeff, did you want to fill us in just a little bit on the objective of Stand With Maine?
I will, Amy, thank you. And very briefly, but hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and huge thanks to Amy and Jane Gallagher and former Senator Roger Cates, just tremendous chapter leaders driving this grassroots campaign. I am speaking to you from Casco Bay, Peaks Island, which is one of the silver linings of the remote working we're all doing now. I get to spend more time here in Maine. I think Will, Everett, and others, maybe at Friends of Casco Bay, are going to join us. A long time ago, when I started practicing law in Portland, I helped get Friends of Casco Bay going, ran for the Water District on an environmental thing, and then went up to State Planning Office and did Clean Water Act work before moving to Boston to join the Attorney General's office there, where we did cases like Mass versus EPA to force the EPA to regulate carbon gases and address the climate situation. So I have been there with you all in the struggle for a systemic response to this massive systemic crisis we face as a globe, as humanity, and here in Maine as well. Like Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and many others, I think it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to solve this problem without a constitutional amendment that allows we the people to enact reasonable limits around how money is used in our political system. There's so much incumbent whether it's fossil fuel or other incumbent forces that can now deploy money to block any action to address our systemic problems. So that's the constitutional amendment. Launched American Promise 4 years ago. The Maine resolution that Amy mentioned was one of the first states to actually say, we want this constitutional amendment. We're going to work for it. We know it's hard. You need 2/3 of Congress. You need ratification in 38 states. But we think, like Maine can do, we can unite Republicans, Democrats, Independents to do the right thing for the country and for Maine. And that kicked off something. 20 states around the country have now followed Maine's lead. 220 members of the House of Representatives are sponsoring a constitutional amendment that will do what we seek. 47 senators. We need 290 in the House, 67 in the Senate to get it out. We have a strategy at American Promise to do it, and Maine is crucial. The objective of this campaign, we are cross-partisan. You know, not many causes and organizations can do what the folks in Maine have done to bring, you know, Olympia Snow and Tom Allen and Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine with Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. Really an extraordinary effort. And the goal is to make sure that when voters go to the polls in November, not a candidate for any race, in particular the very expensive out-of-state funded Senate race, but any race in Maine, the voters know where every candidate stands. Do you stand with Maine and support this constitutional amendment and will go to Washington to get it done? Or do you stand with the big money? It's got to be that binary choice. This campaign makes it possible. And we will find, I think, we're creating the environment for the kind of cross-partisan vote or the consequences for failing to get to stand with Maine. But that's the kind of strategy. Maine is a pivot point. We help kick it off. We can bring it home. So what's going on here is going on in states all over the country with a strategy to get this done. So I wanted to share that sort of national picture and so say just how important this campaign really is because it can really do nothing less than, well, save the world. If we do this right, this is not just a Democratic issue, not just a sort of progressive issue, but something that nobody can run for office without getting behind. And that's when constitutional amendments happen. We're on track to get this done in the next few years. So thanks to everybody for doing so much. And I look forward to this great conversation with these superstars of the Maine environmental work. So I'll stop there and back to you, Amy. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Peter Garrett. Peter is a hydrogeologist who's worked for the Maine DEP writing hazardous waste regulations for protecting groundwater and managing programs for acid rain, salt, and groundwater. More recently, he worked for a private groundwater investigation company managing projects and designing wells, primarily in Maine. Now semi-retired, Peter is involved in the Waterville Rotary as a past president and has been the Maine state coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby for over 2 years. We're also glad to say that Peter is an American Promise Maine chapter member. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Peter.
Thank you, Amy. So for those of you who haven't heard really about Citizens Climate Lobby, let me tell you a little bit about them. So like American Promise, we are non-partisan. We also work with a laser focus like you do. CCL's in putting a price on carbon fuels at the source. American Promise, of course, as you know very well, on a 28th Amendment to limit election funding. Volunteer lobbyists, including myself, meet with every member of Congress while making personal connections with their staff in DC and their home offices in all parts of the US. We all realize that money plays a huge part in politics these days, starting with elections and then what I call legalized bribery, namely expecting support for the legislation that the donor wants, with members of Congress asking for money on a daily basis. By way of introduction to CCL's policy approach and how it can be influenced by election funding, I'm going to use interactive climate policy software developed by MIT's Sloan School of Management. It's called En-ROADS. That's spelled E-N-ROADS. And you can write it down a bit later when you see it on the screen. You can download that software, and you can play it around on your own for free. Please do. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And I'm going to go to En-ROADS. So here's what En-ROADS looks like. You can see, cut that out. You can see that there over here on the left is a graph from the year 2000 through now to 2100. It shows what.
Peter, I don't know if does anybody, I don't think we see that.
Oh dear.
Azer, Amy, do you guys see it?
Yeah,
No, I think,
yeah.
I don't think that anyone can see that.
Oh, Azor, we figured that out. Let me see. Stop share. Let me try it again.
Peter, it looks like your screen is sharing fine, but that maybe the website's not up.
Oh, this one. Really?
We had it working
see that?
perfectly, didn't we?
You cannot see that?
No.
All right.
Try refreshing your browser, Peter.
I beg your pardon?
You might try refreshing your browser.
Oh, okay.
And Peter, that is strange, you know, if it's something
It
that
worked fine, didn't it, before?
well, the screen sharing certainly worked fine, although there might be some difference with this particular thing you're trying to share, which worst case, if it doesn't quickly come up, you know, maybe you can give the top level points and instruct people on how to
sure.
access it on their own time. I think
So it's
that would
not,
be a good
it's
solution.
not coming up then. Anything showing?
Yeah, is there a tab at the top of the screen that says En-ROADS?
Yes.
Have you clicked on that? Because it looks like maybe you're on a Google Doc tab.
And it's not a Google Doc tab. I will use Google Doc tabs a bit later on, but not that
Maybe
one.
it's stuck on that then. If you click on the, try clicking on the En-ROADS tab again.
Right here. That didn't seem to work it. How do you reset that?
Maybe Peter, why don't we go off the screen and maybe we can go to another speaker while you adjust that and then come back to you. Or I'll leave it to Amy to moderate, but we should try to move along.
Sure. Yep. We can definitely do that. And Peter, if we can't get the website up, I know that you've explained it so well so many times that you could probably give a very good overview of it without having the website in front of you.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that now?
Why don't we just go ahead and you can do that now, because I think you probably know it like the back of your hand.
I do. So En-ROADS is a piece of software that goes from 2000 to 2020. Like
and Peter, just so people can see your face a little bit better, can you stop sharing your screen, and that'll give everyone a better view.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Perfect.
All right. All right. So En-ROADS is a wonderful thing that I hope you get to play with, and you can always give me a call and ask me to do a share somewhere else. But it's an interactive climate policy software, and it allows you to play around with all the kinds of things that you think might do something for climate. Like, for instance, electric vehicles. What does it do? When you use a slider on this software to incentivize electric vehicles, unfortunately, it doesn't do the right thing. What it does is increases coal use, because currently around the world, coal is used to produce electricity a lot, and it would be used more because that's immediately available. Another thing that you might imagine would work really well is to incentivize renewables. And you can move that slider and you'll find that it doesn't do very much. But what really does move the needle is when you put a price on carbon fuels, which is what Citizens Climate Lobby is proposing to Congress, and actually has it in a bill which is called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And it has 80 co-sponsors currently. It is not in the Senate currently, but it does include what's called carbon fee and dividend. So let me just explain that proposal to you. With the carbon fee, a steadily rising price starting at $15 a ton of carbon dioxide emissions. Obviously, that would be more for coal, a little bit less for oil, less for natural gas, is charged at the source. So that's every coal mine, every oil well, every gas well, and ports of entry where it comes in. And the price keeps going up, $10 a ton each year. So it's an increasing price. It sends a signal to the market. And that is what moves the needle towards renewables, towards energy efficiency, towards electrification as we get more renewables in there. And it also creates jobs. So the money from that rising price goes to a trust fund, but doesn't stay there. The trust fund gets emptied every month, going out to all of us and everybody across the country in equal shares, equal to adults, half shares for children. And the result of that is that people who have a high carbon footprint wouldn't get as much in that dividend as people on the low end. And so it is generally fair. It's bipartisan, as I mentioned before. It's it's revenue neutral. It doesn't build the size of government, and it really has the biggest effect on moving the needle on climate change. And so that's essentially what. I should add here that moving the needle on climate change is one thing that carbon pricing does, but it's not a silver bullet. And quite a number of other things have to go along with it too. And I was going to show you that on this graphic, but alas, that's not going to work out for us. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I'll give you my phone number if you want to write it down, 207-592-0004. I'd be happy to talk with any of you beyond.
Thank you, Peter. When you showed me the website, it really struck me that the interactive nature of the website was so interesting because you could really play around and see when you, for example, like you said, increased usage of electric vehicles. Point being, no one solution made much of a dent at all in warming over the next 80 years. It really was a combination of massive effort in almost every area in order to bend that curve and keep temperatures from warming alarmingly. I think it really enlightened me, and I would definitely encourage anyone to take a look at that website, En-ROADS. It really is just fascinating. And Peter, how do you see big money in politics affecting this bill in particular?
Well, what we, as you all know, it's often quite hidden. You don't always know who's contributing what and who's twisting arms. But in general, you know that those agencies that want us to keep using fossil fuels are making sure that this bill doesn't get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Peter. We have a few other environmental leaders to hear from tonight as well. And then once we do, we'll have time for questions and answers from Peter as well as the others. So, so don't go anywhere, Peter.
Okay.
So Sean Mahoney of the Maine Conservation Law Foundation, is Sean available?
I'm on the phone.
Ah, hi,
Yes.
Sean.
Hello, folks. Hi, we're without power here, so I'm on the cell phone.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. If you have a few minutes. Yeah.
Sure. This is it's always awkward to be on the Zoom call when you're on the phone. You can't really get the visual cues.
Exactly.
So thanks for first of all, just I want to say personally, I'm a big supporter of what Jeff and Jane and Senator Katz and others, Dick Woodbury, are doing to try and get money out of politics as a general matter. With respect to, and that also, I'm going to keep it short because there's somebody who's going to be able to speak to kind of the influence that money can have, even in a state like Maine, with respect to legislation, and that's Beth Ahern, who I understand is on. And so I will defer to my colleague and good friend Beth to put the emphasis on that. But I would just point to three specific pieces of news that have come out in the last week or so. Two from outside the state and one from inside the state that just gives an example of the amount of money that is being spent with respect to how we transition to a clean energy future. The first is in Ohio, and as people may have seen, the FBI has indicted the now former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Ohio and a number of his colleagues in a bribery scheme where coal and nuclear power plant companies created a slush fund of about $60 million that was used by the Speaker and his allies and the lobbyists for those companies to get a bailout package passed through the Ohio legislature to bail out coal and nuclear power plants which were economically no longer viable and which should have retired, not because of climate concerns, but because they were too expensive and the people of Ohio were spending money where they didn't need to. That $60 million slush fund was used both to establish power as well as for personal aggrandizement. Similarly, in Illinois, the longtime Speaker of the House there, Kevin Madigan, is under investigation for a similar bribery scheme involving, surprisingly, not really, same parent company owning coal-fired power plants in Illinois, and with pushing legislation that would both deter the growth of renewables, which are now competing and outcompeting coal and oil and natural gas as far as the cost of energy, as well as bailout packages for coal facilities in Illinois. And the last thing, and you may have had this discussed last week when the Sportsmen's Alliance, or the last call you had with the Sportsmen's Alliance, but Maine is now in the midst of a very controversial project involving a transmission line. And there is a referendum that may go to the people of Maine this year with respect to that project. I say may because the law court just heard arguments today as to whether or not the referendum question itself is constitutional and should go to the voters. But put that to the side, the campaign on that referendum has already exceeded, or will exceed, close to $20 million by both proponents, primarily Central Maine Power Company and Hydro-Quebec, and opponents. And for the opponents, while there are many of my colleagues from other organizations who are opposing the project, our organization is not, there are also natural gas companies that are opposing the project, because if the project were to go through, the natural gas companies would be forced to retire almost certainly two natural gas plants, which is the whole point of the project, to bring hydro in to replace fossil fuel. And that would cost them $1 million a day. However, that money has not really been of public notice. Everyone knows CMP and Hydro-Quebec is spending $16 million, I think. But the fact that two natural gas companies are really bankrolling the opposition to the project, at least that campaign, is really not clear to folks. And is another example of how money hides when it's not forced to identify the sources of the money for those campaigns. So those would be three things that I would, that have a real impact on what the energy future is going to be in the United States, and how we are going to address the challenge of climate.
Three very interesting examples. Thank you, Sean, very much.
You're welcome.
And now we'll hear from Beth Ahern from the Maine Conservation Voters, and I'll be turning over my own computer to Beth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for asking me to speak today. I am actually at Amy Cartmell's house. She's my friend and neighbor. Neither of us had power today, and I had no internet, so she said, come here. So here we are. I too, I'm the Director of Government Affairs at Maine Conservation Voters. And at Maine Conservation Voters, we are involved in electing conservationists to office. That's what I'm doing right now. That's where I'm spending my time. And once they're in office, I get to lobby in the State House with the likes of Peter Garrett and Sean Mahoney, which is wonderful. And then we produce a scorecard, which actually just came out, that lets people know how legislators voted on conservation issues. So that's just what we do. We do play in politics, we also, true confession, we have a PAC. We have a PAC, and our affiliate, the National League of Conservation Voters, is a big money spender. Now, you might think, why is that? Isn't that just dirty? And it is. So the problem is, since Citizens United, which was decided in 2010, that put us in this mess, right? That money is free speech, and that it's unconstitutional to limit campaign spending. That's horrible. But those are the rules of the game right now. So if we just say that's awful, and we're not going to play, we're not going to have a PAC, what does that mean? That means there's nobody to challenge the fossil fuel huge amounts of money that have actually bought American races all across the country. If you read Rachel Maddow, if any of you have read Rachel Maddow's book Blowout, which I finished reading this summer, it is just disgusting how much fracking and fossil fuel industry has controlled politics across the country. Now in Maine, Sean explained what's going on with the corridor. That's the best example of money in politics in Maine right now. And as has been said, that, it's hard to trace the money. One of the ways the Koch brothers, it's hard to even figure out where they give money, but they do, and it's infiltrated in Maine politics. And the other thing that they do is support the American Legislative Exchange Council, which introduces anti-environmental legislation. I mean, it's basically a playbook for the fossil fuel industry and, all the bad actors, all big money, supports ALEC. And they have model legislation that has, fought clean energy for a long time. And our last governor took Alex's playbook, he supported most of that policy and worked against clean energy, even though most of Mainers have been supporting clean energy for a long time, clean energy policies. So, I mean, we can grow it here. We can have it affordable. We don't have to be dependent on imported fossil fuel. So, and we can create jobs. I mean, there's only good reasons to support renewable energy here. We have what it takes. So I want to say thank you so much to Jeff and American Promise, because this really is exciting, this nonpartisan venture. And I do believe that a constitutional amendment is the only way we can break through this money and promise in politics. We do not want to, the League of Conservation Voters in DC and Maine Conservation Voters, we don't want to be playing the big money game. We want to have people decide elections, not money. But as long as the rules are like this, we have got to, we've got to get in the game. So we want the game. So it's odd to want to change the rules of the game at the same time we're playing it. So we hope you're successful. I think it's wonderful that you have the support that you have, and I'm totally supportive, and I hope that victory is within our sights.
Well, it is indeed, Beth. Thank you. And I just want to say, Amy, if I could, that one thing we aren't is naive about the political system. You venture to get a constitutional amendment ratified and passed and ratified, you'd better have political savvy and stick-to-itiveness and a realistic view of how American politics works. We do not judge those who have to play by the rules of the game, but what we find is that's the systemic problem that everybody's in, and that's the opportunity. Is it's no win for almost everybody. I mean, it might be a win in the near term for the Koch brothers or those with assets that none of the public interest PACs will be able to keep up with, let alone anybody else. But systemically, it's a loser for everybody. And I think, both parties are now losing races to the other because both parties are very good at this game now. And so it's, I just want to say, we totally understand what you need to do. And we want to save you and all your donors a lot of money by getting this amendment ratified so that the people can decide these issues on the merits, and candidates, may the best candidate and ideas win after we get some reasonable limits on the money that apply to everybody across the board. So thanks for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Beth. And Jonathan Fulford of the Sierra Club of Maine. Is Jonathan on the call, Azar?
Yep, Jonathan, I'm adding you as a panelist right now, so you're going to pop up on folks' screen, and if you can share quickly what the Sierra Club of Maine is up to, and how your work relates to this insidious big money problem we have. Thank you for being on the call, Jonathan. You might have to unmute yourself there.
There we go.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi there. All right. Yes, I'm Jonathan Fulford. I'm on the executive committee on Sierra Club. I'm also the chair or the team leader of the legislative team for Sierra Club. So I've spent some time over in Augusta in various roles, but also wearing the Sierra Club hat. Sierra Club is very committed to getting corporate money out of politics. Definitely, money is not speech. Corporations are not people, and we need to really change this dynamic. We've seen it. Some of the other speakers clearly have stated some of the challenges that we face in the state of Maine. I think the idea of actually making it so that corporations can't contribute for political campaigns, I think is really important, because right now, even with the great clean election laws we have in Maine, leadership PACs are still a way in which unlimited corporate funds can have a huge outsized influence on what legislation moves forward and how the leaders of both parties are beholden to corporations. It undermines the very structure of our democracy. So, you know, we've seen that play out really on both sides of almost every issue that's significant in Maine. So I think that is something we're very, very supportive of, and appreciate all the work that everybody is doing to make sure that that doesn't continue to really erode our democracy. So, and thank you for all the work that you all do. So.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Really
thanks,
appreciate
Jonathan.
everyone being on the call tonight.
And I put in the chat here for everyone that if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A feature in the middle of your screen there at the bottom. Amy, if it's all right, I'd love to ask just a quick question to kickstart this Q&A, but was there something that you were going to add there?
No, only that I think Sean Mahoney might have had to jump off the call for just a minute. I believe he'll be coming back in a sec, but if anyone has a question for Sean, maybe it could wait just a minute. Otherwise, I think Peter, Beth, and Jonathan are available, and sure, kick us off with a question.
Great. Well, I have one, but I see that our friend Roger Katz has his hand up. So Roger, I'm going to unmute you here. Thanks for joining as always. Do you have a question here?
Can you hear me? Hi. Okay. Okay. Good. I just wanted to add.
I think, Roger, I think your internet might be wonky tonight, which I think might be an issue for more than one person.
Yeah, a little scratchy there. And one of the things that I was curious to ask to our slate of panelists here is, you know, it sounds like everyone feels the effects of money in politics as a hindrance to effective environmental policy. Can you guys talk about, you know, say we were to win this constitutional amendment, just imagining your jobs with this barrier out of the way. Talk a little bit about, you know, how that would impact your day-to-day and any direct breakthroughs you think it might be enabling for. And I'll open that up to the panel. I imagine one or two people might have immediate thoughts on sort of why we're doing this whole big project.
I can cut in potentially, and that is that I mentioned at the beginning that we meet with every member of Congress. So the last year we were down in Washington, 2019, we met with 518 of the members of Congress on one day. Now, that's offices, not necessarily members of Congress. But I think we would probably meet more members of Congress if they didn't have to spend so much time fundraising on the side. I don't know that for sure. Do any of you others know how many hours a day members of Congress spend fundraising?
Yeah, I've heard several members of Congress tell me well, interesting stories too that sound like the leg breaker coming to visit them when they get a visit from some of the super PAC lobbyists. But when there's a study that came out that said it's basically 45 to 70% of their time. And then there was also some leaked documents that came out of the freshman briefing for one of the parties, but they're both the same, where it gave them guidelines about how much time they had to spend raising money and their call time, and it matched about the same. And the members of Congress and a couple of senators who talked to me about it said That's actually understates it wildly, that it's both more time and it's more constant on their minds with everything they do. I mean, the pressure to raise money and the pressure to be cognizant that if you don't get your allied independent expenditure efforts lined up, they're going to take you out if you try to do anything. And so that systemic thing, I think it's a constant for members of Congress. Maybe others have experience of knowledge on that too.
Well, I'll say for particularly for me, it would be great for me not to have to spend time raising money, or our organization to spend time raising the money that we do, and just talking to voters about the issues in low cost ways would be fabulous. So that's the most, for personally, I think you asked, Azar, how would it affect my life? It's hard for me to even imagine it right now, honestly, but it's a lovely thought.
Yeah, you'd love to think your elected officials are, thinking of you, their constituents first and foremost, and not feeling the squeeze from their party leaders saying you need to raise this much money to even have a chance of getting reelected next cycle. But we've got a question.
I have a thought also.
Yeah.
Great.
One of the things I've noticed is I haven't been working in Augusta as much as Beth Ahern or Sean Mahoney have for as many years. So about 6 years, I threw myself the past 6 years at Augusta. And one of the things I've found is often decisions are made that don't look like it's a 1 + 1 = 2 outcome. And that usually means I don't understand the forces that are at play. And most often what the force is that's at play that's creating an outcome of 5 instead of 2 is there's some money at play, large money at play for some corporation that is influencing the decision makers in a way that is not obvious and not transparent. So I think as a citizen activist and a citizen lobbyist, I think one thing that would make a huge difference about getting this corporate money out of politics would be that actually things would make more sense, and you'd actually have a greater influence as a citizen on the outcome. So.
Could I add a comment or two as well? And this is not a book plug, but if you want the full story, it's in my book, Corporations Are Not People. 2 examples, I think. One is after the Citizens United decision, almost immediately, if we remember, it's hard to believe, but remember in 2008, there was a bipartisan serious climate conversation going on. Obama and McCain at times were competing to see who was going to be tougher on climate solutions. There were Republicans actively exploring the kinds of things Peter has talked about. And this is another book plug. Senator Whitehouse's Captured book describes how the fossil fuel companies, they didn't dump money everywhere. They targeted Republicans and took them out in primaries and basically made it something that was untouchable and you could not talk about. And so for the people working on the issue, I think it took off the field any kind of responsive conversations. For Sheldon Whitehouse, it took off the field partners who would be needed to actually get something out of the Senate on climate. The other example that is in my book at some length is the Massey Energy explosion that killed over 60 mine workers in West Virginia. They had 65,000 violations of the Clean Water Act and 13,000 violations of the Clean Air, or the mine, I'm sorry, I got it backwards, 13,000 violations of the Clean Water Act and 65,000 violations of the Mine Safety Act. Nobody could touch Massey in West Virginia, and not even the regulators, let alone the advocates, like the folks on this call. It was just it was an untalkable, you couldn't talk about getting Massey to comply with the law. And this is based on, after the explosion that killed those men, it was called, the independent report was something like industrial manslaughter, and walked through and connected the money that Massey used in the political system to the dysfunction of the West Virginia government that was intended to protect the people. There's lots of other examples I'm sure we could all come up with, but I think your jobs would all be a lot easier, and we'd all be more effective as advocates if we could get a responsive, engaged government and legislators and candidates wanting to solve problems.
That's certainly a tragic and egregious example, Jeff. Are there any questions from people who've called in tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just want to raise an interesting point from a caller in Ohio, touching on that first point that Sean raised of, big scandal in the Ohio legislature involving, sort of a shell organization that, was the vehicle for $60 million in dark money, dirty energy bribes. And, there's a lot of talk about disclosure and lack of disclosure, making it hard for voters to know where money's coming from. But that disclosure itself, it just quite isn't enough. If we know that the system is broken and shine a light on it, well, the system's still broken. And I thought that was a good transition into sort of Paul Perkins' question of, with the CMP corridor specifically, it's kind of hard to get a good sense of this current event, big debate that's going on in Maine, because so much money is pouring in from companies that aren't in Maine. They're in other parts of the world, other parts of the country. And sort of when things don't add up, when 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, how can people try to get a good sense of exactly what's going on? And then more importantly, how can people contribute to this big solution of a constitutional amendment? And I think that sort of gets to Bridgette's question of, well, what can we actually do?
Certainly.
It's a big part.
So who's that question to?
Let's open up the first question just of, statewide resources for, factual, environmental statistics. Maybe to Beth, where do you go to get your trusted news when there's, sort of a cloudy, dark money energy around a particular issue? Or
so what I do is go to the Ethics Commission and look at the campaign finance reports, because that, you do have to report what you spend on any issue. And so that can give a lot of information, but I will say that that's not, and people have said to me, that's not an easy site for the public to navigate. You really have to know what you're doing, and you have to, it's not obvious. It's not particularly user-friendly, even though the Ethics Commission, I think, is lovely, and they try to be very responsive to the public. But that is what I do to find out where the money comes from the best I can. Again, with PACs, as has been said.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darshan Gu. I'm the program director.
Sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Oh, no, so that I was done with what I was saying, that, you can check that out, but plan to spend some time with it before you can actually understand what the information it is that it's providing.
But it sounds much too complicated for the average citizen, and that most people wouldn't have the time or the knowledge to even try to sort that out.
Yeah, it's a problem that would hopefully be avoided. But Jonathan, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, early on, when I was running for state senate, I was investigating leadership PAC money. And one of the things I found frustrating was with enough research, with a good researcher looking into that, just like Beth was saying, you can find out a great deal of information. The hard part was now as a candidate, sometimes the news media doesn't always take everything you have to say. They're a little bit jaded, which is understandable. But I could not get news media to cover the issue of leadership PAC money, the sources of it, and linking it to the appearance of how votes were influenced. I thought that was a really important story. I think that's something that as citizens we could kind of try to get our news media to actually cover this issue more in detail and actually reveal more of the money that candidates receive, their leadership PACs receive, and have that research done. I think independent reporters could do a great deal here.
Boy, Jonathan,
Yeah.
I'm surprised that the media hasn't been more interested in that to date, but I wonder if maybe the tide is turning. You know, it seems like every ad that's on TV right now, no matter who the candidate is mentioning the other candidate spending dark money or dark money pouring into the other candidate's campaign. And maybe in light of the situation in Ohio and elsewhere, there's a little bit more interest in the subject in general.
And I will say that there is, I think when light is shed, that change happens. There have been changes to Maine's law recently. It used to be that you could run clean, you know, take state money and have a leadership PAC, which seemed rather, that didn't seem quite fair. And that law changed 2 years ago. And the other law that changed is lobbyist contribution to candidates has changed. That lobbyists are now prohibited from giving, and I don't remember the dollar amount, but that's been severely limited as well. So those are two positive changes in Maine. But I just want to say, sort of, this is you know, I've spent a lot of time in the halls of the State House. I will say, I think money in politics is way more of a problem on the federal level than it is at the state level. Maine legislators are incredibly receptive to constituents, and they want to hear what you have to say. And yeah, and Roger could talk about that better than any of us, but I just want to give a plug to legislators who I think work very hard for very little money and very little credit. So I just want to say that.
Great. And I see that Brigitte has a question, which I think sort of hits it on the head. You know, most environmentalists see money in politics as a big problem. What specifically do they need to do to help be part of the solution? Jeff, maybe I could turn this one over to you. You founded an organization around this very question.
Yeah, thanks, Azer. And I was in the midst of typing my good friend Brigitte a response. Hi, Brigitte. Thank you for that. We have been in a lot of this work together over the years, and once we're rookie politicians running for the Portland Water District and serving on the Board of Trustees around cleaning up Casco Bay and protecting Sebago Lake and other things. So Brigitte, thank you, and for all the work you do. So what can we do? Number one, this Stand With Maine campaign, the objective is really, really clear. The more Mainers we have signed up from across the state, every county, every town, every demographic, every political perspective, the more organizations we have signed up to truly show what, you know, the Amy and Roger and Jane and so many others have shown, that this genuinely is a urgent will and wish of the Maine people, we will be able to leverage that. And you can rest assured we will, to create the kind of political pressure that makes this an issue that politicians, candidates, elected officials have to respond to. So the very clearest way you can help, if you haven't already, sign up and sign on to Stand With Maine. Sign your organization up, Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, and as I said, Stand With Maine, the great co-sponsors on this call. The more network leverage we have, and if you could distribute the Stand With Maine concept, and Azer and the team and the American Promise chapter in Maine, Stand With Maine, is happy to help provide anything you need to be effective. We want to get 10,000 Mainers signed up fast, and we want organizations across the different demographics. So to have all the environmental groups, you know, we can argue about the power line projects and other issues where there's complex arguments on both sides, but on this one, I think if we can really unify the outdoors and environmental advocates around this, that's a lot of leverage and pressure on our politicians to pay attention. So that's key. We'll share like how to do that and a link in the chat. Perhaps, Azer, you could do that. The chapter has done tremendous work because it's authentic citizen-driven, cross-partisan, really, really effective, as many of our state chapters around the country are. So if I know everyone's got a lot on their plate, but if you want to join the chapter, there's a meeting coming up, which you'll hear more about. So again, those are real things. It's not petition gathering for the sake of petition gathering. It is high leverage, candidate impact. We are C4 as well as C3. And this is a genuine grassroots campaign that is getting the ear of our elected officials. So that's the biggest way you can help. Amy or Jane or Roger, want to add anything to that?
Sure. I would say that Jane Gallagher and I are the co-leaders of the chapter, the American Promise Maine chapter. And as Jeff mentioned, we have a petition for Stand With Maine that you can go to standwithmaine.org to sign. And there's other information on that website as well, some frequently asked questions and other information on Stand With Maine. And then anyone who's interested in joining the chapter can just email me at acartmel@kw.com, and I will add you to our chapter list. We meet the first and third Wednesdays of each month. And right now we are trying to have a speaker the first Wednesday of each month, like today, which I so appreciate everyone who's been on this call. And the third Wednesday is more of an informational meeting for chapter members. We would love to have anyone join us to help us with this cause. Absolutely.
Great. And should I bring Jane into the conversation to talk about the specifics of when that next chapter meeting is?
Yes, Jane mentioned in the chat that she was having some internet issues. So if she is available, that would be great. If not, that was part of the reason that I went ahead and mentioned our next meeting. So that'll be August 19th on Wednesday, August 19th at 6:30. There's Jane.
I am. Yeah, you guys have done such a good job. I don't want to repeat anything you've already said, but I do want to, there's something I can add, I think, to this conversation, and that is that, you know, it's not just about turning off the flow of money, it's really about building the network so that we can reclaim our local voices and our local power. And that's why we do what we do. You know, I have a serious concern about our democracy, and I think this is like the most logical step that's an actual antidote to some of the threats to our democracy that I can see happening right now. And if we want local people to make local decisions, then we need to stand with Maine and we need to get this amendment passed. And I believe we can do it. We're getting attention and we're building momentum. I would say we're a small but mighty group, but it would be so great to have more people join. And the last thing I just would say is that this truly is a cross-partisan effort. In the last month, I was on 2 American Promise calls. One was a national call, and one of the featured speakers there was Nina Turner from Ohio. And a little quote from Nina is, she said, "People are on our side. We must give a spine to elected officials who don't have one." And that was a quote that stuck with me. And then just a couple of days later, we had our monthly call, and Dave Trahan from Maine, a former legislator and head of Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, was featured on our monthly call. And that was a really good, interesting call. And something Dave said stuck with me, and that was, this effort is on the side of the angels. We must move to the people who we can influence. So we got the people, we got the angels, join us. It's a really important effort to strengthen our democracy, and it will have meaning, it will have an impact. So hope that some of you will see you again.
Right, thank you, Jane. And I'd just like to
Wonderful.
say
Thank
one
you,
more
Jane.
time, I so appreciate Peter Garrett, Sean Mahoney, Beth Ahern, and Jonathan Fulford for joining us tonight. We have been enlightened by your comments, and want to thank you one more time.
You're welcome. It's good to be on such a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Have a good rest of your night.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful night.